But if you marry me, everything becomes so simple and logical.
Miss Madden, marriage is never simple and seldom logical.
Besides, it would improve your standing when you start practicing again. I always have much more confidence in a doctor when he has a picture of his baby on his desk. Now, look, it wouldn't take long at all. I was married in my last play. I know just how to do it. Now, morning would be the best because we could go right down and have the baby adopted, and you wouldn't waste any time getting started on your rabbits. Let's make it Saturday,
They were the faces of Hollywood's golden age, glamorous, graceful, and endlessly adored. But behind the red lips, perfect hair, and studio-approved romances, many of these legendary women were hiding something far more daring: secret love affairs with other women. In an era when same-sex relationships could ruin a career overnight, these actresses navigated fame, pressure, and desire with breathtaking boldness. Some left behind letters filled with longing. Others lived with their partners in quiet defiance. And a few? They flaunted their freedom behind closed doors, knowing the world wasn't ready to see them clearly. From Greta Garbo's mysterious love letters to Marlene Dietrich's fearless seductions, from Joan Crawford's rumored romances to the coded language of the Hollywood sewing circle, this is the untold side of classic cinema that the tabloids couldn't print, and the studios worked hard to erase. These stories aren't gossip, they're history, hidden, complicated, and deeply human. So stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll see these Golden Age icons in a completely new light. This isn't just about who they loved, it's about how they loved in a world that told them not to. Greta Garbo, the Sphinx with a secret. Greta Garbo was Hollywood's ultimate enigma. Famous for her haunting beauty and her reclusive nature, she became an icon not just for her roles, but for her silence. Her quote, "I want to be alone," wasn't just a line from Grand Hotel, it became her truth. But in that solitude lived a world of hidden longing, emotional passion, and coded romance. Among the many rumors surrounding Garbo, one has endured with an almost mythic intensity: her deep bond with writer and socialite Mercedes Diaosta. Their letters, filled with longing, affection, and poetic longing, hinted at a love that could never fully live in the light. Some biographers believe they were lovers. Others argue it was a love unconsummated, but emotionally rich. There were whispers, too, of a torrid affair with fellow icon Marlene Dietrich. But if the romance burned, it didn't last. Instead, it allegedly turned into a bitter rivalry. Whether true or not, it added fuel to the fire of Garbo's mysterious image. Garbo never married. She never confirmed any relationship publicly. But perhaps that was part of the power. She existed just out of reach. Her desires hinted at through veiled letters, half-true stories, and performances that ached with emotion. For Garbo, privacy wasn't protection. It was identity. As we move from the Queen of Silence to a woman who embraced desire loudly, let's turn to Marlene Dietrich, who wore her queerness like a badge of honor, even in a time when that was considered dangerous. Marlene Dietrich, seduction in a tuxedo. Marlene Dietrich didn't just bend the rules, she broke them, then rewrote them in her own image. With her smoky voice, sharp suits, and sultry stare, Dietrich brought androgyny into the mainstream long before the world was ready. In the 1930 film Morocco, she wore a tuxedo, kissed a woman on the lips, and forever changed what on-screen seduction could look like. But her rebellion didn't stop at the screen. Dietrich's real life was a whirlwind of affairs, men and women alike. She allegedly counted among her lovers not just fellow icon Greta Garbo, but writer Mercedes Diaosta and French chanteuse Edith Piaf. Her charisma was magnetic, and her reputation for romantic conquest was legendary. Dietrich used style as defiance. She dressed in tailored suits, flaunted her bisexuality in elite circles, and made no apologies. Hollywood couldn't control her. Society couldn't define her. And while tabloids hinted and studios whispered, she remained gloriously unbothered. Her love affairs with women weren't just rumors. They were open secrets, shared behind velvet curtains and at glamorous parties where queerness was quietly understood but never spoken aloud. Marlene thrived in that in-between space, using fame as a shield and style as a sword. Now, if Marlene danced with danger, our next star dove in head first. Let's talk about Tula Bankhead, the southern wildfire who never cared who knew she loved women. Tula Bankhead, wild, witty, and unapologetic. Tula Bankhead wasn't just an actress. She was a storm, known for her sharp wit, reckless charm, and love of living on the edge. She was as much a fixture in gossip columns as she was on stage. And when it came to love, she made no apologies. Openly flirtatious with women and men alike, Bankhead was one of the few stars of the era to joke, loudly and publicly, about her bisexuality. She once quipped, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said a word about women and cocaine." It was more than a punchline. It was truth wrapped in bravado. She reportedly had affairs with actresses like Patsy Kelly and possibly Marlene Dietrich, though Bankhead rarely stayed in one place, or with one person, for long. Her lovers came and went, but her legend only grew. She was a charter member of the fabled Sewing Circle, a covert group of queer women in Hollywood who formed emotional and romantic bonds while carefully avoiding public scandal. Tula didn't just break rules, she ignored them entirely. And in doing so, she gave voice, albeit in her own chaotic way, to a kind of freedom most actresses could only dream of. She never hid. She never asked permission. She simply was. Next, we move to someone who lived behind a quieter mask. Barbara Stanwick didn't have Tula's flair for chaos, but her stillness hid secrets just as bold. Barbara Stanwick, Hollywood's best-kept secret. Barbara Stanwick was the queen of control. Whether playing a femme fatale in Double Indemnity or a no-nonsense businesswoman in Babyface, she always commanded the screen. But behind her calm, composed exterior was a private life that never quite added up. Despite multiple marriages to men, Stanwick's most enduring relationships were with women. Rumored affairs with Marlene Dietrich and a longtime female publicist fueled speculation that she was a lesbian or bisexual. The studios denied it. Stanwick never addressed it. But in an industry obsessed with image, silence was often as revealing as confession. She chose roles that echoed her off-screen mystery, women who were strong, self-sufficient, emotionally closed off. The lines between her characters and her private life blurred. Friends described her as fiercely guarded, refusing to let anyone too close. She was part of Hollywood's "don't ask, don't tell" culture long before the phrase existed. And while she never confirmed her truth, many believe she lived a life filled with hidden love and quiet resistance. As we shift to our next actress, we meet someone equally iconic, yet no less enigmatic. Katherine Hepburn rewrote the rules of womanhood in film, and perhaps in her heart as well. Katherine Hepburn, a love beyond headlines. Katherine Hepburn was never interested in fitting into Hollywood's mold. With her sharp jawline, clipped voice, and signature trousers, she rejected traditional femininity and forged her own path. But beyond the screen, her personal life was just as defiant and far more private. For decades, she maintained a close relationship with Laura Harding, often described as her companion. They lived together, traveled together, and were inseparable for years. Many believed their bond was romantic, though neither ever confirmed it. Hepburn called it friendship, but friends and insiders often suspected more. Then there was her long, storied connection with Spencer Tracy. To the public, it was a great romance. But some biographers suggest their relationship, while deep, was more about companionship than passion. Tracy was married, devoutly Catholic, and tortured by guilt. Hepburn, too, had no interest in marriage or motherhood. What they shared may have been love, but not the kind the public imagined. Hepburn carried herself with masculine energy and wore men's clothes long before it was fashionable. She refused to play by the rules of gender or of Hollywood romance, and while she never labeled herself, her life was a quiet challenge to the expectations placed on women in the spotlight. Next, we'll turn to a star whose image was tightly controlled, but whose secrets still shimmer beneath the surface. Joan Crawford's off-screen life may have been more complex than anyone dared to admit. Joan Crawford, behind the glamour and grit. Joan Crawford's image was everything. A master of reinvention, she rose from silent film extra to Academy Award-winning star, carefully curating every inch of her persona. To the world, she was all cheekbones and control, a fierce, ambitious woman who clawed her way to the top. But beneath the diamonds and designer gowns was a woman guarding more than just ambition. While married 4 times to men, including high-profile names like Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Crawford was long rumored to have had romantic affairs with women, including actresses like Barbara Stanwick and even a young Marilyn Monroe. Industry insiders whispered about her late-night rendezvous, her private parties, and the women who entered through back doors and disappeared before dawn. Crawford's reputation for control extended to her personal life. She destroyed letters, managed public narratives, and made sure the studio press teams kept certain stories buried. But every now and then, cracks showed, suggestions of relationships that defied the era's expectations. Studio records and personal letters that have surfaced over the years suggest a life lived in layers, one for the cameras, one for the press, and one entirely her own. Joan Crawford wasn't just protecting her image. She was protecting the freedom to love in secret. And speaking of secrets, our next figure didn't just live quietly, she documented everything, and in doing so, pulled the veil off a generation of hidden love. Let's meet Mercedes Diaosta, Hollywood's most dangerous woman. Mercedes Diaosta, Hollywood's most dangerous woman. Mercedes Diaosta wasn't an actress, but her impact on Hollywood's hidden queer history is undeniable. A poet, playwright, and openly lesbian woman, she lived boldly in an era when most hid in shadows. With her tailored suits, sharp wit, and fearless charm, she seduced some of the most glamorous women of the 20th century, and wrote it all down. Her lovers allegedly included Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Isadora Duncan, Tula Bankhead, and Eva Legalen. She wasn't just part of the queer elite. She was its heartbeat. Her letters to Garbo were filled with yearning and devotion, while her time with Dietrich was said to be as passionate as it was turbulent. Mercedes refused to hide who she was, even as her boldness alienated some of her lovers. Her 1960 memoir, Here Lies the Heart, revealed just enough to scandalize Hollywood and infuriate the women she once loved. Garbo, in particular, reportedly severed all ties, furious that their connection had been hinted at in print. But Mercedes didn't care. She lived for truth, for art, and for love, regardless of convention. In a world of closed doors, she threw hers wide open, and she wasn't alone. One of her closest companions helped create a haven where women like them could simply be. Let's step into the world of Alo Nazimova. Alo Nazimova, Queen of the Sewing Circle. Alo Nazimova wasn't just a trailblazing actress. She was a force of nature. Born in Russia and a stage sensation before moving into silent films, she became one of the most powerful women in early Hollywood. But her most lasting legacy may not be her roles. It may be the secret society she quietly nurtured. Nazimova coined the term sewing circle, a coded reference to Hollywood's network of lesbian and bisexual women who supported and protected each other. Behind her grand estate, the Garden of Allah, she hosted some of the most private, glittering, and subversive gatherings of her time. Women like Tula Bankhead, Mercedes Diaosta, and Eva Legalen found refuge there. She lived openly with her partner, designer Greta Garbo, at a time when simply being seen in public with a woman could ruin a career. Nazimova didn't just survive, she thrived, refusing to let the industry rewrite her identity. Her rumored affairs with fellow actresses were whispered about, but rarely challenged. Her power and talent gave her a kind of immunity others didn't enjoy. Nazimova's name may not be as instantly recognizable today, but her bravery helped carve out a space for others to follow, including our next star, a woman who lived behind the mask of Southern charm but hid a life far more complicated, Ona Manson, the tragic belle of Hollywood. Ona Manson is best remembered for her role as Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind, the tough, warm-hearted madam who offered grace when no one else would. But in real life, Ona was fighting for acceptance in a world that barely tolerated her truth. For years, she was in a romantic relationship with Alo Nazimova, becoming a fixture at the Garden of Allah and a quiet part of the sewing circle legacy. But her public life was a different story. She entered into a lavender marriage with actor Edward Bozell, a union widely believed to have been arranged to shield both of them from speculation about their sexuality. Despite her Hollywood success, Ona struggled deeply with depression and the emotional toll of hiding who she truly was. She moved between studios, between lovers, and between masks, always trying to find a space that felt safe. Her tragic death in 1955 ruled a suicide, shocked those closest to her. But for many in Hollywood's hidden queer community, it was another reminder of how heavy the burden of secrecy could become. Still, Ona's name lives on in the stories whispered through old letters and long-lost journals, and she wasn't the only starlet whose public marriage hid a deeper truth. Our next story brings us to Jean Aker, the silent film actress who married a Hollywood heartthrob while loving someone else entirely. Jean Aker, the wife who loved women. Jean Aker had one of the most curious love stories in early Hollywood. In 1919, she married none other than Rudolph Valentino, one of the most desired men on the planet. But there was one major twist. Their marriage was never consummated, and within weeks, Aker had locked him out of their shared home. The real love of Aker's life was Grace Darmond, a fellow actress with whom she shared a long, committed relationship. The two were part of early Hollywood's hidden lesbian circles, living as openly as they could, while maintaining public personas that fit the era's expectations. Aker's marriage to Valentino is now widely believed to have been a lavender marriage, a strategic arrangement to mask their true sexual orientations. The tabloids spun stories of betrayal and heartbreak, but behind the headlines was a different narrative. A woman forced to choose between authenticity and survival. While Aker never spoke publicly about her relationships with women, she never denied them either. In a world where silence was often the safest option, her actions spoke volumes. And speaking of Grace Darmond, her partner in both life and secrecy. She too had a story worth remembering, one that continues in the next chapter of this hidden history. Grace Darmond, a starlet in love and silence. Grace Darmond may not be a household name today, but in the silent film era, she lit up the screen with her elegance and subtle charm. Yet her greatest love story didn't play out on camera. It was lived quietly, behind the scenes, with fellow actress Jean Aker. Grace and Jean were deeply committed to each other at a time when same-sex relationships weren't just taboo. They could end careers. While Aker took the public hit by marrying Valentino in a high-profile and short-lived union, it was Grace who stood beside her once the headlines faded. The two were part of the Garden of Allah's inner circle, the private world where queer stars could let down their guard. Though Darmond never spoke openly about her sexuality, her life with Aker told the real story. They traveled together, shared a home, and remained companions long after the fame of their silent film days had faded. Their love was one of quiet defiance, unwritten in press clippings, but clear to anyone who truly looked. Grace, like many women of her time, vanished from public memory when the talkies took over. But her legacy endures in the whispers and recovered stories that piece together a portrait of strength, love, and devotion lived in the margins. As we turn from the silver screen to the stage, our next figure was one of the most fearless artists of her generation. Eva Legalen didn't just act, she built a legacy of queer truth in an age of censorship. Eva Legalen, theater's hidden flame. Eva Legalen was a powerhouse of American theater, an actress, director, producer, and founder of the Civic Repertory Theater. But beyond her cultural impact, she stood as one of the few women in her era to live her truth with quiet, defiant pride. Outed by tabloids in the 1920s, Eva never denied her attraction to women. She had romantic relationships with playwright Mercedes Diaosta and actress Josephine Hutchinson, both of which were as creative as they were personal. Rather than retreat into shame or spin lies for the press, Eva simply carried on, working, loving, creating. She was intensely private, but never apologetic. Her artistry thrived outside of the studio system, where she was free to pursue deeper, more intellectual works, without the relentless gaze of Hollywood's image machine. Still, she faced backlash, blacklisting, and whispers that threatened her career at every turn. Eva's influence rippled outward. She mentored young actresses, built a space for women's voices in theater, and challenged the idea that queerness had no place in the arts. Her courage laid groundwork that would benefit generations who came after her. Now, let's shift from the stage to the director's chair. Our next story isn't about a leading lady, but about the woman who made stars. Dorothy Arsner's love story was lived in plain sight, but few dared name it out loud. Dorothy Arsner, Hollywood's first female director, and lover Dorothy Arsner broke every rule in the book. As the only woman directing major studio films in the 1920s and 30s, she carved out a space for female storytelling in a man's world, and quietly lived as a queer woman in a town that rarely allowed either. She lived with her partner, choreographer Marion Morgan, for over 40 years. Their relationship was an open secret in the industry, though never openly acknowledged in the press. Together, they created not just a home, but an artistic partnership that influenced countless productions. Morgan's dance troupes often featured in Arsner's films, subtly blending their worlds. Arsner gave breaks to rising stars like Katherine Hepburn and Lucille Ball, She often chose to direct films about strong, independent women, stories that mirrored her own fight for agency. And while she dressed in tailored suits and refused to conform to Hollywood femininity, she commanded respect in every studio lot she entered. Though she never labeled herself publicly, Arsner's life was a quiet, daily revolution. Her presence behind the camera and her refusal to hide who she loved made her not only a trailblazer, but a symbol of what was possible for women in film. But even in quieter corners of old Hollywood, love stories lingered in whispered speculation. Our next actress wore magic on screen, but behind the sparkle was a life of carefully managed mystery. Let's step into the world of Billie Burke. Billie Burke, the woman behind Glinda, and maybe more. To most, Billie Burke is remembered as Glinda the Good Witch, the floaty, glowing figure from The Wizard of Oz, who descends in a bubble and speaks in kindness. But off-screen, her life was more complicated and perhaps more rebellious than her most famous role suggests. Married to Broadway impresario Florenz Ziegfeld, Burke seemed to live a fairy tale. But over the years, quiet rumors followed her about her closeness with women, particularly her connection to director Dorothy Arsner. They were often seen together, spending long hours on and off set, discussing scripts and hosting industry gatherings. Some suspected their bond ran deeper than friendship. Burke was part of a Hollywood elite where image was everything. Her sweet, motherly persona kept her safe in the public eye, even as her name appeared again and again in quiet conversations about Hollywood's queer undercurrent. She never confirmed any relationship outside of her marriage, but the whispers never faded. In a world that demanded conformity, Billie Burke lived with grace and subtlety, and perhaps a quiet subversion. Her life remains an unsolved story, one written between the lines. And finally, we close with an actress who never made headlines for scandal, but whose relationships were quietly observed and deeply felt. Let's meet Anne Harding, the woman who walked the line between admiration and hidden love. Anne Harding, a star who walked a fine line. Anne Harding wasn't flashy. She didn't court scandal or wear defiance like armor. Instead, she radiated quiet sophistication, on screen and off. A classically trained actress who rose to fame in the 1930s, she specialized in roles that balanced elegance with emotional depth. But her personal life carried its own quiet complexity. Though she had marriages to men and fit the mold of a traditional star, many who worked with her believed Harding shared a long-standing romantic friendship with a woman in the industry, possibly a costumer or assistant with whom she traveled, lived, and worked closely for years. Harding never confirmed the nature of the relationship, but she never denied it either. She maintained a dignified silence, choosing to live her life on her own terms, away from tabloid drama. That emotional intimacy, protected from public scrutiny, reflected a quiet queerness that was present but unspoken. Her story isn't one of headlines, it's one of subtleties. Glances, travel records, shared homes, and deep companionships that blurred the lines between friendship and love. She walked the fine line between truth and image and did it with poise. And perhaps that's the thread that connects all these women. Whether they were rebels like Dietrich, secret keepers like Garbo, or quiet souls like Harding, they all loved in a world that told them not to. And somehow, they loved anyway.